This is part 14 of the series, The State of the United States Economy and Society. I'm Edward J. Dodson. The subject of this particular presentation is the crisis of law. We are said to be a nation ruled by law, rather than by the directives of individuals holding positions of authority. For differing reasons, many of us argue that our system of laws violates fundamental human rights or the laws are inconsistently enforced. The erosion of respect for the law and for those charged with enforcement of law has exposed serious cracks in the American system. Well, what's the situation in the country right now? There were 6% fewer homicides during 2024 in the cities reported on in this study than in 2019. Similarly, sexual assault was down by 26%, domestic violence down by 11%, and robbery down by 19%. In contrast, however, aggravated assaults increased over the same period by 4%, gun assaults by 5%, and carjackings by 25%. Based on a comprehensive analysis of crime statistics, the firm Data Pandas concludes that Louisiana is the most dangerous state in the United States. Alaska and New Mexico follow closely behind. The United States has the highest incarceration rate of any independent democracy. Every single state incarcerates more people per capita than most nations. The question is this because Americans commit more crimes, or is it because our system of laws penalizes behaviors not penalized in other countries? Proponents of gun ownership or of gun control can argue over the impact guns have on violent crimes. What economists know is that the sale of guns, other weapons, and ammunition has become an important part of the security-focused economy. Surveys indicate that the percent of individuals who own guns has been falling and is probably somewhere between 38 to 46%. Guns are, however, good for GDP growth, but not so good for building social cohesion. Gun violence surged during the COVID-19 pandemic. Although since declined, the level of gun violence remains well above the level recorded in 2016. The Center for American Progress reported in June of 2024 that on average, gun homicides fell much faster in states with the strongest gun laws, while states with the weakest gun laws saw marginal improvements to public safety, if any. Now let's take a look at the relationship between crime and race. There is a widespread perception that Black and Latino men are the most frequent perpetrators of violent crime in the United States. The U.S. Department of Justice statistics indicate that about 2 in 100 Black men commit a violent crime in any given year. Among the urban poor, black-on-black assaults occur at a rate of 51 per 1,000, while, and get a hold of this, white-on-white assaults occur at a rate of 56 per 1,000. A 2016 report of crime and race by Edwin S. Rubenstein of the New Century Foundation analyzed police reports and surveyed victims and witnesses, concluding as follows. There are dramatic race differences in crime rates. Asians have the lowest, followed by whites and then Hispanics. Blacks have notably high crime rates. This pattern holds true for virtually all crime categories and for virtually all age groups. In 2015, a black person was 2.45 times more likely than a white person to be shot and killed by the police. A Hispanic person was 1.21 times more likely. These figures are well within what would be expected given race differences in crime rates and the likelihood to resist arrest. In 2013, of the approximately 660,000 crimes of interracial violence that involved blacks and whites, blacks were the perpetrators 85% of the time. This meant a black person was 27 times more likely to attack a white person than vice versa. A Hispanic was 8 times more likely to attack a white person than vice versa. In 2024, U.S. property crime rates generally showed a decrease compared to 2023, though some types of property crime saw increases. Specifically, motor vehicle theft increased, while burglary, larceny, and theft from auto generally decreased. Shoplifting also experienced a slight increase. Sadly, the FBI's Uniform Crime Report shows that the majority of crimes remain unsolved. A serious problem is the incomplete data captured and shared by federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. An encouraging sign is the decline in the number of youths arrested as well as those eventually confined in correctional facilities. More young persons found guilty of committing a crime are now confined separately from adults. However, there is a significant disparity based on race and skin color. Black youth are 8.6 times more likely to receive an adult prison sentence for similar criminal offenses. This information comes from the Prison Policy Initiative. For many children, legal system involvement overlaps with other kinds of systems involvement, such as the foster care system. Almost half of youth in foster care have an encounter with the criminal legal system by age 17. The criminalization of youth is apparent in the adult prison population. More than 1/3, 38% of people in state prisons were first arrested before they turned 16. What about the never-ending war on drugs? The use and abuse of addictive chemical substances ruins many lives. This is not in doubt. We have spent billions of dollars and incarcerated millions of people for producing, distributing, and consuming these chemicals. These measures have accomplished little except to enrich drug cartels whose members rely on violence to conduct their activities. Nor has education and educational efforts been effective. On the one hand, there are millions of existing and potential users of drugs who succumb to their use. And on the supply side, there are the enormous profits to be made by people who control the supply and distribution. Back in 1999, an investigation by the PBS program Frontline concluded globalization hit organized crime over the last decade and is now integral to its most profitable business, the international narcotics traffic. Once a regional problem involving a customer base of a few million and barely $1 billion in sales, the illegal drug industry is now a worldwide enterprise with tens of millions of hardcore consumers spending hundreds of billions on opiates, cocaine, and amphetamines and marijuana, as well as other drugs. Fast forward to 2024, and the problems of addiction affect every community and almost every family. A press release in May of 2024 by the Drug Enforcement Administration stated that drug-related deaths claimed nearly 108,000 Americans in 2022. Fentanyl and other synthetic opioids are responsible for approximately 70% of lives lost, while methamphetamine and other synthetic stimulants are responsible for approximately 30% of deaths. The DEA is fighting a never-ending and losing battle against the cartels. Social media platforms and encrypted apps extend the cartel's reach into every community in the United States and across nearly 50 countries worldwide. Drug traffickers and their associates use technology to advertise and sell their products, collect payment, recruit and train couriers, and deliver drugs to customers without having to meet face-to-face. This new age of digital drug dealing has pushed the peddling of drugs off the streets of America and into our pockets and purses. The cartels have built mutually profitable partnerships with China-based precursor chemical companies to obtain the necessary ingredients to manufacture synthetic drugs. They also work in partnership with Chinese money laundering organizations to launder drug proceeds and are increasingly using cryptocurrency. The American Medical Association's 2024 report on drug overdose states, in 2023, approximately 5 million people used cocaine, 3.9 million people misused prescription stimulants, and 2.6 million people used methamphetamine. Overdoses involving stimulants, for example, methamphetamine, cocaine, are rapidly increasing. Approximately 40% of fatal overdoses involving illicitly manufactured fentanyl also involve stimulants, for example, cocaine, methamphetamine. Stimulant-involved deaths are highest in rural counties and have increased for all racial and ethnic groups, with methamphetamine-involved overdoses highest in American Indian and Alaska Native populations, and cocaine-involved overdoses highest in Black populations. After far too long, physicians have finally awakened to the addictions they fostered by prescribing opioids to deal with patient pain. For the 12 months ending August 2024, there were 89,740 deaths caused by drug overdose. This is a reduction from the previous 12 months, which totaled 111,464. Between 2022 and 2023, the rate of drug overdose deaths increased among adults aged 55 to 64 from 48.1 to 49.2, and 65 and older 13.2 to 14.7. Although the deaths per 100,000 persons is increasing, the number of males dying from a drug overdose is increasing far faster than is the case for females. The issue for us as a society is how to respond to the widespread use of life-destroying drugs. Is greater regulation, oversight, and more severe penalties needed? Back in 2017, a former federal prosecutor, David Skalansky, offered his views on the effectiveness of criminal prosecution. He said, mandatory minimums have had a terrible effect on the American criminal justice system, and we need to retreat further from their use, not return to the patterns of usage a decade ago. Let's take a look at the crime by computer hackers. As we know, billions of dollars are lost every year as a result of computer and network intrusions, cyber attacks by criminals, by adversaries, and by terrorists. Law enforcement has had to respond by continuous expansion of resources and staff. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Cyber Division employs specially trained cyber squads located at the FBI headquarters and in each of its 56 field offices. One category of cybercrime that is seemingly uncontrollable is identity theft. 365,758 cases of identity theft were reported in the first quarter of 2025, up over 70,000 from the previous quarter. Credit card fraud was the most common type of identity theft in the first quarter of 2025. Americans 30 to 39 years old are most likely to fall victim to identity theft. Older and younger Americans are least likely. During 2024, the Federal Trade Commission received 5.7 million fraud and identity theft reports. Of this total, 1.4 million were identity theft cases. Nearly 400,000 of these cases involve the theft of government documents or benefits fraud, causing total losses estimated at $10.2 billion. The sad state of affairs is that we are victimized by a wide and growing range of identity theft and internet-based crimes. One has to question the ethical basis of our relations with one another and why such a large number of people are drawn to this behavior. In part, it comes down to something the American political economist Henry George observed about us late in the 19th century. He wrote, "This disposition of men to seek the satisfaction of their desires with the minimum exertion is so universal and unfailing that it constitutes one of those invariable sequences that we denominate laws of nature, and which we may safely reason." This 2015 survey by PricewaterhouseCoopers of 500 U.S. executives, security experts, and others reported heightened concerns over cybersecurity and the potential for cyber attacks back then. Globally, a record 1 billion data records were compromised in 2014. As motives and means continue to evolve, so do the methods of attack. Distributed denial of service attacks are becoming increasingly potent and are one of the most frequent types of cybersecurity incidents. An analysis by Chad Kime of eSecurity Planet in May of 2024 identified 5 areas of greatest exposure: compromised credentials, attacks on infrastructure, organized and advanced adversaries, ransomware, and uncontrolled devices. A 2021 FBI report stated that out of 847,376 cybercrime cases reported in 2021, the losses amounted to nearly $7 billion. Statista calculated the monetary losses in 2023 for the United States at $12.5 billion. However, statistics from the National Institute of Standards and Technology put the costs in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Now let's take a look at the fake and counterfeit medicines and goods. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative recently issued its 2024 review of notorious markets for counterfeiting and piracy. The review highlighted the dangers of the growing availability of counterfeit medicines offered by illicit online pharmacies. The use of fentanyl as an ingredient in pills is identified as a serious problem. In the United States, U.S. Customs and Border Protection seizes thousands of shipments of goods that violate intellectual property rights each year, with the value of the seized merchandise usually exceeding $1 billion. In 2020, the retail value of the 26,503 seizures made by CBP amounted to $1.3 billion, meaning that the seized goods would retail for that much if they were legitimate. Now we'll take a look at corporate crime. British Petroleum paid $20 billion in 2015 to settle civil charges relating to the Deepwater Horizon disaster, $4 million paid in criminal penalties. Volkswagen was penalized $2.8 billion for purposely building a diesel engine equipped with software to misreport greenhouse gas emissions. U.S. banks were fined $200 billion for their role in the financial crisis. The world's financial institutions were found guilty of predatory lending, fraud in the creation and marketing of various asset-backed securities and derivatives. Bank of America got into trouble for the practice of robo-signing in connection with foreclosure actions and for predatory practices under the government's Home Affordable Modification Program, as described by journalist David Dayen in 2013. The government's Home Affordable Modification Program, which gave banks cash incentives to modify loans under certain standards, was supposed to streamline the process and help up to 4 million struggling homeowners. In reality, Bank of America used it as a tool to squeeze as much money as possible out of struggling borrowers before eventually foreclosing on them. Bank executives and managers have hardly blinked. Multiple banks implicated in the scheme agreed in 2015 to pay $4.3 billion in fines for their roles in manipulating foreign exchange markets. The banks included HSBC, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Royal Bank of Scotland, and UBS. Fraud as an accepted business practice exacerbated the depth and duration of the latest and all other collapses in our financial markets. And yet, as one law professor commented back in February of 2015, after Standard & Poor's agreed to pay $1.375 billion to settle civil charges that it inflated ratings on private label mortgage-backed securities, more often than not, when the largest corporations are prosecuted federally, individuals aren't charged. Somewhat surprisingly, during 2017, Texas Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Jeb Hensarling, who introduced legislation to scale back portions of the Dodd-Frank bill, came down fairly hard on Wells Fargo and Company Chief Executive John Stumpf, testifying before the House Financial Services Committee. To the American people, this kind of feels like deja vu all over again. Some institution is found engaging in terrible activities, there is a headline, fine, and yet no one seems to be held accountable. In September of 2017, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a revision of its policy on prosecuting white-collar crime. When corporations are the violator, the difficulty is finding the evidence to prosecute individual executives. Statements by the Deputy Attorney General indicated there would be an intensified focus on individual accountability. Criminal prosecutions of white-collar offenses have been declining for decades under both Republican and Democratic presidents. But amid sweeping policy and personnel changes at the Justice Department, that downward trend seems poised to accelerate under President Donald Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi. One of the major fraud cases of 2018 was that of Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos. Ms. Holmes agreed to pay a $500,000 fine, relinquished 19 million now worthless shares of the company, and was banned from working for the company for 10 years. In September, Theranos was dissolved. Holmes was convicted in 2022 of fraud and sentenced to 11 years in prison. This chart reveals how few white-collar crimes are prosecuted. Estimates of the annual losses from these crimes range from $425 billion to nearly $2 trillion. The reason for this wide range in estimates is because of the lack of prosecutions. Fraud makes up 63% of white-collar crimes. After fraud comes embezzlement, often by individuals in management, followed by larceny, theft. Doing the time. Who's in prison? There are today over 1.9 million people held in various correctional facilities across the United States. Overcrowding is a serious issue in many of these facilities, as is understaffing and the inability to provide adequate health care. Violence within prisons remains an unresolved challenge. The United States, with 5% of the world's population, has 25% of the global prison population. There is widespread understanding that our criminal justice system is overwhelmed with cases and our prisons filled with inmates whose sentences are excessively punitive and arbitrarily imposed. 1 in 5 persons in prison are there for drug-related offenses. Those in prison for these crimes are disproportionately persons of color. No one should be surprised that blacks are overrepresented in our prisons and whites are underrepresented. The debate continues over the causes. Is it law enforcement prejudice? Is it growing up in disadvantaged communities? Is it drug dependency? Is it lack of access to high quality education? Is it the breakdown of the traditional family structure? Most likely, the causes are all of the above and more. The largest prison system in the United States is in Los Angeles County. On an average day, the county's lockups hold close to 13,000 people. A working paper published by the Institute for Justice Research and Development at Florida State University estimates the full cost to the U.S. society associated with incarceration of so many people includes the following. $91.1 billion for corrections costs, $70.5 billion in lost wages of incarcerated persons while incarcerated, $230 billion reduction in lifetime earnings of incarcerated persons, $62.6 billion associated with the higher mortality rate of formerly incarcerated persons, $28 billion more in non-fatal injuries to incarcerated persons, $1.7 billion caused by fatal injuries to incarcerated persons. And with that, we've completed this section. What's next? Next, we'll deal with what is perhaps the greatest challenge we face. This is one we cannot deal with without strong international cooperation. It is the crisis of the environment.